History Magnified is supported in part by the Red River Valley Center for Arts and Crafts, the Wendelin T. Anderson Finkelzwip Foundation, and contributions from viewers like you. Thank you. My fellow Americans, never before in our history have we been so mightily tested. From coast to coast I hear it repeated, can our nation long endure? The First Amendment, being the first of all the amendments, has always epitomized what America stands for. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, and freedom to petition. We have rule of law and we have our rights as acknowledged by the Constitution. But a great nation is more than mere laws written on paper. It is a fundamental understanding of why those laws exist and where those rights come from that tethers us to reality and holds us together in the most turbulent winds of change. Over the centuries, we the people have woven a flag that has stood the test of time. The fabric of this nation is still strong. But will we let our tumultuous differences tear at us, thread by thread, until we are no more? My fellow Americans, that is up to you. May God grant us all wisdom in the coming days and years ahead. And may God bless the United States of America. President-elect Kid Rock.
Isn't free speech!
There's been a number of things that have unfolded over this changing situation throughout the morning. It all started with some supporters of President Trump announced plans to have several speakers address a crowd at noon. Well, a group calling itself mostly anti-fascist showed up around 10 o'clock to make sure that people would know that not everyone in Berkeley supported these speakers. Police set up...
It started with football player Colin Kaepernick, who knelt during a football game back in September. And as other players around the country have followed suit, Kings fan Carla Mendoza says they have every right to.
That's his right, and I think that will...
The speech war was fought in 20,000 places, from Smithville, Virginia, to Crescent City, California, Birchdale, Minnesota, to Lordsburg, New Mexico. 30 million Americans fought in it. 3.5 million, over 1% of the population, died in it. Users of the websites Facebook and Twitter were the first soldiers to shed blood and die in the conflict. The war later spilled into real life. Few places were spared from the physical and psychological destruction. City parks, playgrounds, and university campuses became battlegrounds. This is the story of one man's journey from perpetual protester to finding peace.
I was just a kid in high school when Obama was elected president. I grew up in a small town in the South, but I always had big plans for my life. And after Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize, I was so inspired that I went to the big city and I got myself a degree in peace studies with a minor in social justice. Now, unfortunately for me at the time, I discovered that there were not a whole lot of employers who were in need of my expertise. So for several months, I resided with my mother while I went on a journey of self-discovery. And I was just excited with everything that was going on, but my mother, she was not as enthusiastic. She was very concerned about the fact that I had all this college debt and I was still living in her basement. And it got to a point where she finally said, "Son, you need to get a job." And I said, "I have a job. I am the conscience of this household." And she didn't like that at all, and we got in an argument, and I decided I was going to move out. Not just out, but far away. I made a decision that I could no longer live in a state that was once occupied by Robert E. Lee. So I packed up and I moved to the state of Washington. Now I had some misgivings about moving to a state named after a slaveholder, but I fell in with a fantastic group of community organizers up there, and I was as happy as a June bug. Yeah, Obama had inspired us all.
President Obama had inspired the nation. Within a couple of years of taking office, millions of Americans had taken to the streets to agitate for change. They marched, they sang songs, and they occasionally destroyed a business or two. It was paradise on earth. Late into the Obama administration, as the organizers continued their quest to remake society, they ran into some snags along the way. The economy stagnated, jobs went away, people in blue states moved to greener, not as blue pastures. Organizers began to feel pressure to perform. The outlook was not as bright as it once was.
Now, it was kind of ironic because I had never had a job in my life. Now, suddenly I was this full-time protester, basically. A bunch of us folks would be bussed all over the country, agitating for various causes, fighting for 15, or let's get rid of this disgusting pipeline, or somebody at a college is racist, let's get him fired. On top of it, there was always some fool on Facebook calling me a communist or a Marxist or what have you, so I was obligated to respond, and pretty soon I was sending out 100 Facebook posts a day and 300 tweets a day, and I was like I had 2 full-time jobs now. It was just tiresome. It was just very, very tiresome.
And then the unthinkable happened.
There's a guy totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks.
Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually...
What is your comment? I said, the wall just got 10 feet higher. It's true.
We can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects Donald Trump wins the presidency. The business tycoon and TV personality capping his improbable political journey with an astounding upset victory. Donald J. Trump will become the 45th president of the United States, defeating Hillary Clinton in a campaign unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States. President Obama and Mr. Trump, for the moment.
The election had totally caught the Democrats by surprise, and they weren't really sure what to do. So, once again, they marched, they sang songs.
He will not divide us. He will not divide us. He will not divide us. He will not divide us.
And they occasionally destroyed a business or two. It was hell on earth.
He will not divide us. He will not divide us. He will not divide us.
All that work I did, and it just seemed like it was all for nothing. So I didn't go out and protest the election and try to get it reversed or whatever. I just laid off social media for a couple months because I just couldn't handle it. It was just too much. Well, okay, I didn't fully go off of it. That's just crazy. I just use it sporadically. You can't go cold turkey. That's just crazy. But, you know, I got a job at an antique shop, a part-time job. I stayed home and watched Netflix, and I just kind of stayed away from social media. And I think because of the job and staying away to a certain extent, I think that's what protected me in the speech war.
By the end of the year, it was apparent that America's political climate had taken a turn for the worse. In October 2017, the Cato Institute released a survey on free speech. 58% of Americans felt that the political climate prevented them from speaking freely. Washington was in a stalemate. It was hard to work on actual policies because that took a lot of effort. It required focus. And with the news cycles and people's attention spans, no siree, Bob. Politicians got this idea that, hey, let's not get bogged down with policy here. Let's just tap into this anger that's brewing out there. And I think if you want to understand why the speech war happened, you have to understand the mood the country was in. No matter what your beliefs were, there was always something to get torqued off about. There was no swaying of minds. It was just people yelling at each other. It created a bubble mentality. You couldn't relate to the other side at all. And this is why there were arguments over statues or who can speak on campuses or whether or not to boycott the NFL. Politically, 2017 could be summed up as people with power and influence giving pep talks to their troops. Troops being metaphorical at this point, but it would soon turn literal. This was the beginning of the speech war. The speech war had, in fact, already begun. The signs were there for all to see, but no one could have predicted the devastation that would soon be unleashed. America had already seen the first effects of the war. Millions watched on election night as Clinton supporters wept uncontrollably. Campaign aides felt physically ill. A woman from Minnesota reported that she threw up and said that her body totally rejected the result. A Twitter user reported crying on the floor of my bathroom all night and then all day at work the next day, and then for a whole week straight, literally. Psychologists wondered, was this just election anxiety and stress? Were people having nervous breakdowns? People had reported similar conditions when George W. Bush was reelected, but something about this was different. Months after Trump's inauguration, the psychological effect on people was still very strong. It was enough to make some people scream at the sight of a Trump supporter.
This is what happens when you don't take your meds.
The condition stayed with people, with symptoms randomly flaring up and then subsiding. Some people discovered that they could get temporary relief by draping themselves in the flag, but the condition never seemed to go away completely. 1 year after the election, people suffering from the illness noted the anniversary by screaming into the sky. Then, on the anniversary of Trump's inauguration, war broke out. Trump supporters on Twitter had decided to celebrate by posting their favorite videos, GIFs, and memes of the election. They retweeted a video of Trump wrestling in a WWE match with the CNN logo for the opponent's face. It was too much for some liberals to bear. Across the country, there were 1,100 reports of fainting spells, specifically tied to watching this video. 7 people lapsed into comas. A day later, this video of President Trump hitting Hillary Clinton with a golf ball caused a pandemic. 23,000 took ill from the video. Several thousand people collapsed right where they were when they viewed it. At their offices, in the mall, on the subway, in their homes. This time, over 650 people died on the scene or on the way to the hospital. The CDC was called into various locations throughout the country, but could not determine any pathological threat. As far as anyone could tell, they had died from the stress of being offended.
I was having lunch with a friend when we heard a commotion, and a few tables down, somebody had collapsed and they were writhing on the floor. My friend was trained in CPR. She went to see if she could help, but there was nothing she could do but hold the person's head while he was convulsing. and somebody was calling 911, and everybody in the restaurant just thought it was a seizure. But I noticed his phone was sitting on the table, and I could see the title of the video he just played, and it said, Donald Trump's amazing golf swing. And I didn't know what that was all about, or I hadn't really seen it, but I thought, well, that's kind of weird, but maybe not too weird, considering everything else that was going on. So, but then outside, some people from outside came in, and they just started yelling, "There's people fainting on the sidewalk." And I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? So I was starting to get real scared. And me and my friend, we were just getting scared. So I lived nearby, and I ran to my apartment, and we had to weave around all the dozens of bodies that were scattered everywhere. I had my shirt over my mouth because I thought maybe there was some toxin in the air. I got to my apartment. My friend turns on the TV, and I'm getting duct tape to put around the doors and the windows. And we find out that this wasn't just all over the city, but all over the country that people have collapsed, and many of them have died. And it turns out it was Trump's amazing golf swing. And I knew then that the battle for the soul of America had taken on a new plane of existence. This was the beginning of meme warfare. And I made a promise to myself right then and there that no matter what happened, I was going to get out alive. No matter how bad it got, I was going to get out alive.
America was in crisis. People didn't go out and shop. The economy tanked. Millions lost their jobs. And now more people were at home with nothing to do except vent online, meaning more people to post nasty, rude comments online, and more people who saw those comments got sick and died. The offended, they decided they weren't going to just sit there and take this, so they got up and they attempted to destroy anything that was offensive to them, thinking that somehow this would get rid of the poison that was killing them. They knocked down statues, they ransacked libraries. That, of course, made the other side even more angry, and people died by the tens of thousands at a time. This was a horrible cycle that just went on and on. The National Guard had to be deployed because amateur armies were emerging. There were, of course, political attempts to stop all this, curfews, martial law, but the sad truth is that political chaos, vandalism, violence, it became one of the ugly realities of life that people just didn't know what to do about, kind of like the opioid epidemic of the previous years. Now, not every place in America was affected in the same way. Some had it bad and some didn't. So amazingly, for a lot of people, this was a new normal. A very strange, horrible new normal.
People would ask us all the time, why don't you just shut down the internet and ransack the buildings of the internet service providers? And why would you still go online if it was literally killing you? Well, let me ask you, have you ever tried going offline for 3 days at a time? It's very difficult. I mean, no, destroying the internet was never an option. I mean, most of us had shows on Netflix we hadn't got to yet. I was only halfway through the last season of Gilmore Girls. Everyone I knew had shows queued up, wondering if they were ever going to get through them all. You watched shows online, and then you talked about the shows on the social media. And then, of course, it veered into politics, but that's just the way it was. I mean, what were we supposed to do? Go out and buy DVDs?
By the summer of 2018, millions of Americans had volunteered or been drafted into the massive Army of Resistance. Gus reluctantly found himself swept into the newly formed Corps of Dismantlers, whose mission was to destroy anything that symbolized the greatness of old, outdated America. His division moved east through Washington into northern Idaho and Montana. Months passed by. Cycles of vandalism and violence, memes and massacres continued unabated. There was no end in sight for the war. By October 2019, they had fought their way well into the middle of North Dakota, near the city of Jamestown. Their orders were to take down one of the most unique tourist attractions in the Northern Plains, the world's largest buffalo statue. This was a good target for a couple of reasons. One, the buffalo was designated as the official mammal of the United States a few years before the outbreak of war, so culturally it was nearly on par with the eagle in representing America's status. Two, the U.S. National Guard was not deployed in the area because they had their hands full in the Black Hills of South Dakota, with the #1 priority of protecting Mount Rushmore and the surrounding area. The buffalo would be an easy target. However, a network of spies learned of the plan after a dismantler posted it on Facebook. A posse was rounded up, and when news of this event went viral, hundreds of volunteers poured in from across the country, traveling hundreds of miles to stand guard on the hill or patrol the area. They were waiting when the dismantlers arrived.
You know, everything at this point was just so messed up. In fact, it was moo-bar. Messed up beyond all reckoning. I didn't realize what I was signing up for. All of this was way out of control. Way out of control. I mean, my friends was saying, come on, you gotta sign up. You gotta fight those fascists. Come on, we're gonna whip them boys and be back before the holiday season. You know, and that was totally wrong. This was dragging out longer than anybody had ever anticipated. So here I was riding and marching through Montana, wrecking things. And what good is it doing? You would think it would be therapeutic to tear down an interstate roadside attraction, but no. Everybody's still ticked off afterwards, and there's still stupid people online trying to kill you.
Gus, along with the 2nd Regiment, camped a quarter-mile northwest of the statue, north of the James River, while the protectors, as they called themselves, dug in and bolstered their defenses, and charged their smartphones. Everyone sensed that a battle would soon take place. While the campfires were being lit down below and the nightly drum circles were forming, the protectors on the hill also began a war chant.
Later in the afternoon, you could see and hear some of the people up there marching in circles around the buffalo with their torches saying, "The Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us." And I was thinking, what the heck does that have to do with anything? There are no Jews here to knock down your buffalo. And if there was, I'm sure the boys holding the Free Palestine banner would let us know about it. I mean, at this point, everything was so messed up. I was just done. Mentally, physically, I could not even.
The Major General addressed the men and women of the dismantlers, telling them it was going to be a tough battle, maybe the toughest battle they had ever faced. He told them that despite the fact that they had outnumbered the protectors had command of the hill and possessed superior memes. But then Division received a text message from HQ, giving them permission to fight fire with fire. They began artillery bombardment using their own memes and trolling techniques, in hopes to thin the enemy lines. Giant billboards were erected for the protectors to see. "Trump has small hands," one sign read. "How's the wall coming along?" another read. And a third read, "Your mom called, it's time to come home. She's making grilled cheese for supper." The billboards had some success. Some protectors were driven into fits of rage. They were rendered unfit for duty and were dragged off the front lines, screaming and cursing. And some others simply went home for supper and never returned.
Let me tell you, the ones that stayed and survived the artillery bombardment, they were tough as nails. They were brutal, ugly trolls, and that night as we were getting ready for bed, you could hear them calling out the ribbit yell. And what they would do is just go on their smartphones or tablets and play a YouTube video of frogs croaking at night, and that was supposed to represent Pepe the Frog, which was of course a well-known hate symbol. Now just imagine hundreds and hundreds of them playing that YouTube clip all at once. It struck fear in our hearts because we knew it was going to be a big fight tomorrow.
Morning arrived. You could feel the tension in the cool, crisp air. A battle was imminent. At around 1:30 p.m., as Gus and the rest of his company got out of bed, they awoke to a horrible realization. The protectors were launching a surprise attack.
As I was getting out of my sleeping bag, I heard someone shout, "Incoming!" And everything was just a blur after that. There was a massive struggle at the bridge over the James River, and they were just charging us, trying to punch a hole through our lines. And when they charged, they would hold out their phones and tablets, showing various statistics and facts and memes. And these were the dankest memes I have ever seen in my life. And they just punched through and overran us. And people were just dropping like flies, hitting the ground. I was in full retreat, sprinting as fast as I could, I ran until I found a medic's tent, and then I just collapsed.
It was a disaster for the resistance. Any chance they had for destroying the statue was gone. The protectors had caught them off guard and scattered them north into the streets of Jamestown. At a coffee shop, a ragged man was seen weeping into his phone. "Sir, I have no division," he cried.
I woke up about a couple hours later, and I sat up and I tried to get oriented. I was a bit dehydrated and a little dizzy. I had some cuts on my face and my arms, but otherwise I was okay. There were dozens of other wounded soldiers laying on cots. Nurses and doctors were tending to people. And as I'm sitting there, a couple of people rush in and inform me that they are trying to organize what is left of our men, and they determined that I was now the captain of the company, and I have to report to the commanding officer right away. They handed me a manila envelope and rushed out. I didn't even look at the envelope. I was just feeling as sick as could be. Now, across from me, there's this guy who I guess was trampled in the panic of the retreat. His legs were bandaged, and he had bruises all over. He was actually on a morphine drip. You could tell that he was all doped up. And a nurse tending nearby to the soldier in the cot to my left, she had her back to him. And he says, in a raspy voice, as he's gesturing to her, he says, "Hey man, can you get me a drink of water?" And the nurse just spins around and just yells, "What did you call me? What did you call me?" And because he had unwittingly committed the hate crime of misgendering her. And now her hair was very short and she had her back turned to him. And the guy was doped up out of his mind. He just looked at her with a puzzled look going, "What?" And he didn't understand what was going on. And she sits down and she starts hyperventilating into a paper bag. And it was at this moment that I realized that we were going to lose the war, and that we were in fact fighting a lost cause. And I just said over and over to myself, when is it going to end? When is it ever going to end? And my mind just went blank. For the next few minutes, I don't even know what happened at all.
This is the moment that every kid in high school learns about. This is the famous March Up the Hill. Although most of it was just driving up to the tiny parking lot in the frontier village that was right next to the buffalo statue. But anyway, he commandeers some random person's vehicle. He drives up the road like a crazy person. Another car is filled with his officers, and they don't know what he's doing. He parks the vehicle. They park beside him. At this point, there was only a few protectors on the hill because the battle was over. People had either gone home or went to get something to eat. So anyway, he gets out and starts booking it with this determined look on his face. We're talking Mel Gibson in The Patriot here, okay? Guys are coming at him and he's just bowling them over or punching them and throwing them over his shoulder. The leader at the base of the statue, he's got his smartphone out and he's browsing through his memes and pictures trying to find something that's going to take this guy down. But he doesn't go down. The other protectors are paralyzed. They don't know what to do. Gus is still running towards them, his men following right behind. Goes right up to the leader. He snatches the phone right from the guy and delivers the famous speech. Shame on you for allowing hatred to fill your hearts. Shame on anyone who would allow themselves to be allied with trolls and provocateurs. And then he turns to his own men and says, and shame on us for allowing them so much power over our emotions. And then he whips the smartphone right towards his own men.
Yeah, I do remember whipping that phone like it was like it was a frisbee golf disc. It beamed my first lieutenant right in the head. He was okay, but yeah, I wasn't even thinking of the military or anything like that. I just said, we are done here. Your monuments can't kill us anymore. You can have this buffalo, and we are gonna leave you alone. I suggest you pack up your frog memes and you also get out of here. And I walked away, and I realized I didn't feel sick anymore. And my men told me that for the first time in months, they also didn't feel sick. And it was just good, just for a moment, not to be weighed down by all the injustice of the world. And that was that.
Both sides were stunned by this unexpected turn of events. News of Gus's actions spread quickly through the whole town, and within a day, the whole world learned of what had happened at the Buffalo. Gus became famous overnight. It was the beginning of the end of the war. 2 weeks later, the Army of Resistance dissolved. Even though there were sporadic minor outbreaks, the wave of mass casualties and violence that swept the nation had finally subsided. Now it was time for America to pick up the pieces. The era of Reconstruction had begun, and it was a long journey of recovery, complicated by the fact that, once again, Americans had new leadership, and the new administration seemed to be learning on the fly. The utter insanity of the speech war had convinced 39 senators and 146 House members to not seek re-election. Even President Trump decided not to seek a second term, and Pence also declined to run. In fact, only one man was unabashedly optimistic and confident in America's future: Robert James Ritchie, Kid Rock. In the summer of 2019, he announced his candidacy for president, and he ran unopposed for the Republican nomination.
Because wouldn't it be a sight to see President Kid Rock in Washington, D.C., standing on the desk in the Oval Office like a G? Quite like...
In November 2020, he became the leader of the free world, winning the election with 76% of the popular vote. Gus went back home to see his mom for the first time in 5 years, and it was while he was there that he got the phone call that changed his life.
Out of the blue, I get a call, and a woman introduces herself as Wendy. This is the woman that had hyperventilated in the medic tent. She was talking about how embarrassed she was over the whole thing in the medic tent and how inspiring I had been at the Buffalo statue. And it gave her this idea. She wants to start a foundation to help people, and how would I like to be a part of it? And I said, well, I still don't have a full-time job, so sign me up.
The Wendell and T. Anderson Finkel's-Whip Foundation began its mission throughout the United States and the world of teaching people of all ages the art and science of de-escalation and empowerment, how to deal with bullies, knowing the difference between bullying and arbitrary microaggressions, and basically how to get through life without freaking out every 10 minutes. For his key role in ending the speech war, Gus received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. He also received the Presidential Medal of Freedom on February 1st, 2021.
I always knew that degree in peace studies was going to pay off.
And I was here watching it all go down. And I'll still be when it comes back around. And it's times like these we can't replace. It's times like these we must embrace. And even though it's bittersweet and brings us to our knees, it makes us who we are in times like these. It makes us who we are in times like these.